So many people had assembled outside the palace walls, and the Brahmins were the most unruly lot. They were making so much of noise and disturbance there, and the palace soldiers were beating the Brahmins into staying in line. We live in peace. This is how we were. But then we became the other because we were everything the Muslims were not. So they came, the Arabs, the Turkic Muslims, with one book, one God, one way. And that is it. They introduced the notion of caste system. Indians never had anything called caste. We only had Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra. These are the colonial, Eurocentric missionaries, the socialists, and the Marxists. So these people have imposed their ideologies by subverting the history of India, taking that and subverting it with their ideologies, and led to complete distortion of identity in the present. This is what we see.
Raji, namaste.
All right. Thank you for inviting me, Ravi Shankarji, to your channel on Clubhouse. It's always a pleasure to come and talk to audiences that are interested in this topic and interested in decolonizing the mind. So today's topic is exceedingly important in the context of contemporary attacks on Hinduism and so on. So we need to even see what does it mean to assert the Hindu identity. That's the provocative title of today's talk. So today we are seeing that all around there are things like so many wars on Hinduism, the caste wars, for example. Wherever you go, there are people talking about caste. In the United States, we're seeing different cities trying to bring about ordinances, trying to judge Indians over here on the basis of this notion that they call caste and spurious notions of that nature. We're seeing this bizarre spectacle unfold in apparently a society that values itself on pride, on rationality, evidence, and so on. We are seeing these kind of narrations that are taking root over here. And we are seeing all kinds of narrations, right? There's a rigid, immobile, hierarchical caste system, untouchability, and you see more demonization, swastika, Nazi ideology, Brahmin hegemony, patriarchy of Brahmins. Brahmins are evil people. In the Hindus are superstitious. They have sick practices like cow urine and all of those kind of things. So we are seeing so many antagonistic and clearly hate-filled, bigotry-filled narratives against the Hindu people today. So my talk today, I'm hoping that we'll address some of these things. So I'd like to first address how did we get here? With all these distortions and demonization, how did we get here? And the second part, I'd like to address some of these distortions using evidence. I'm all about evidence, right? I mean, if we pride ourselves in living in rational times, then we need to pay attention to the evidence that is out there. We need to critique the narratives and see where the narratives are taking us with evidence. Then I'd like to also address defining of what is this Hindu identity. Even the term Hindu is contentious to some people. So what exactly do we mean when we go and say Hindu identity? So I'd like to have some kind of a formal definition on who we are as Hindus. And finally, how do we assert that identity? So there are people today who are so scared to even say they're Hindus, let alone anything else about themselves, because that's the amount of distortion they have internalized, and that's the amount of self-esteem that has been destroyed in Hindus today. They're even afraid of saying who they are. So how do we assert that identity? I'd like to talk a little bit about that also. So I often say this, who are the people who distorted this Hindu identity? For what purpose did they do that? That's the first question, right? Hindus, for the longest time, we have a fairly decent idea of who we have been as a people, and we recognize our ancestors, their practices, how beautifully it fits into the rhythm of the universe, and so on. But today, there is such a distorted narrative on who we are, that we are these oppressors, and we oppress people, and we practice divisions, and we do all this kind of nonsense over there. So who even started some of these things? I'd like to talk about the unsatisfactory historiography of India. So if you see, is my slide even moving over here? Okay, I'm not able to move this. All right. So the first thing we see is the historiography. Who imposed certain narratives on the Indian civilization? I've talked about this in many of my talks, so some of your readers hopefully know these things, that we have 5 frameworks that have imposed their ideology on the Indian civilization. These are the colonial, Eurocentric, missionaries, the socialists, and the Marxists. So these people have imposed their ideologies by subverting the history of India, taking that and subverting it with their ideologies, and led to complete distortion of identity in the present. This is what we see. Colonial people, when they came to India, they take a look at the enormous chronology of India, and they say, how does this fit into the Bible framework, which is God created the world in 4004 BCE, and God destroyed the world in Noah's flood in 2500 BCE. So how can the Indians have in their Puranas a chronology going back to such incredibly ancient times? So they said this is all distorted, and they started playing around chronology, distorting Indian identity. I started right over there. The Eurocentric people, they came about the notion to try and show Indians are backward, primitive, superstitious people, and the white Europeans are forward, progressive, modern, technologically advanced, and so they can bring light to these blighted people who live in these nations. So that's a kind of bigoted narrative with which they came about, and they also observed that Sanskrit is related to Latin, Greek, and so on. They wanted to figure out why exactly the relationship between Sanskrit and the European languages. In the process of doing that analysis, the field of linguistics was born, and through a whole lot of haphazard growth in that field, driven by very Eurocentric kind of notions, they came about the idea that there's an Aryan invasion to India, which happened in 1500 BCE. That was a start of enormous distortions in the Indian history and identity. Missionaries were there wherever the colonial people went. They had the papal bull from the Catholic Church saying, whichever land you go to, claim that for Christianity. Vasco da Gama came this side, Columbus went that side, and they had all the nonsense we know that has ensued from that time on, the enormous misery that has been brought on the world by Christianity. We have seen that happening all over the place. And the Protestants are not far behind. So they too, through the English Anglican Church and others, we have seen the Dutch, we've seen the kind of things that they have also done in the Indian diaspora. So bottom line, missionaries were the forefront of translating Sanskrit literature, whether it is the Puranas, whether it is other works. The missionaries were the ones translating them to European languages like English, German, and other languages, and they had a motivation to try and present these works as superstitious. They refused to see the metaphoric wisdom. They refused to see the philosophical content. Their intention is to present it as a bunch of ravings of people high on soma or some such thing. So that is the kind of narrations we see in the missionaries, and that impact lasts to the present day, where the distortions introduced by missionaries continues till today. Then since 1947, unfortunately, we have inherited Nehruvian socialism, and that has impacted all of Indian studies from then on. The socialists are in bed with the Marxists in their belief that the past is corrupted, the past is primitive and corrupted, and if we want a utopian future classless society, we must destroy the past. Now, the socialists believe that change can come through constitutional means. That is why in India we see that there are so many laws that prevent the expression of Hinduism. That's primarily because the Congress government, along with the Nehruvian socialist ideas, that has been at the forefront of restricting the expression of Hindu identity and so on. And we see that whether it is in the takeover of temples, whether it is a so-called anti-superstition bill, whether it is a so-called reservations through caste-based mechanisms, all this nonsense has come about through the socialist way of looking at things. And the Marxists, since 1972, when Indira Gandhi made a pact with the devil, literally, for political survival, so they wanted the HRD sector, nothing more. So Nurul Hassan was appointed as the HRD minister, and they've controlled the entire ecosystem of learning in India, which is whether it is the universities and various departments, so-called social sciences. Everything is controlled by somebody who's either a socialist or a card-carrying Marxist. Only then you can head these organizations. And they have brought about their horrendous ideology that everything as Karl Marx said, history is a story of class conflicts. It is only that the oppressor class and the oppressed class, and they are fighting each other, and that's all there is. And Marx believed that change will come on the back of a bloody revolution, where you kill off the old order, and then you'll have a classless utopian society. And that is what Marxists believe to the present day. And here the old order is Hinduism. So this is why we see enormous distortions in the Indian context. And over here, I've tried to show how these ideologies, a bit of a very, very simplified representation, but it captures the essence over here. The colonial people wanted to uphold the Bible chronology, show Hindus as primitive, backward, stagnant, superstitious, discriminatory. Eurocentrics, the same thing, and to show superiority of the white Europeans. Missionaries upholding Bible chronology, showing Hindus as backward, promoting Christianity, and showing class conflicts, that the so-called Dravidians are an oppressed people by the Aryans of the north, things of that nature. The missionaries started this kind of divisions and such things. And we see the socialist academia wants to show Hindus as primitive, backward, and stagnant. That's why society is not progressing. And they promote the so-called subaltern history from below, amplifying the voices of the so-called oppressed, because they have this oppressor dynamics. Everything in the Indian social order is only seen through the prism of conflict dynamics. So they see everything like that, and they present a certain kind of horrendous narrations over there. The Marxists, they too want to show Hindus as primitive, backward, stagnant, oppressor-oppressed dynamic, show class conflicts, and claim victimhood. Today, this victimhood business is very, very big with wokeism, right? So wokeism wants to show that they're all victims. The oppressed people are all victims, and the oppressors are these people over here who we are up against. And that's why we see all of these things. We also have this deracinated Dravidianism out there, which has internalized this nonsense from the missionaries and the British and the Europeans. And they too want to show that the people in Tamil Nadu, that their religion is separate of the so-called Aryan-based religion, Vedic religion, where Shiva and Murugan are the southern deities, nothing to do with Vedic deities. And they try to show that Hindus are primitive, backward, superstitious, and they are in bed with the Christians. Ever since Christianity had a foothold in Tamil Nadu, it has made great inroads. Now it controls almost every aspect of governance in Tamil Nadu is controlled by the Christians. And so they promote Christianity and obviously claiming victimhood. So they want to show that they are victims and such things. So this is the problem. So many narrations are out there. And these corruptions are not something that came overnight. These have been built over 300 years. That is why we see the pervasiveness of this kind of a horrendous narration, whereas the Hindus themselves did not have a voice in this dialogue. When the Europeans were imposing these narratives on Indians did not have the opportunity or the world stage to come and say, wait a minute, this is utter nonsense. So a one-sided narrative has taken root all over the world in academia. So whether it is colonial scholars, missionaries, Eurocentric scholars, the Dutch, the Portuguese, French, British, with colonial hegemony, with Christian imperialism, people like Calvel, Abbé Dubois, and others, Geo Pope. So they came about the idea that Hinduism is a post-flood religion. The flood we're talking is Noah's flood, and caste-ridden oppressors, Dravidians are oppressed, Brahminical Aryans are evil people. They came with those fundamental ideas and they push that discourse. Very simple message, but elaborate kind of narration of these things to push it into people's minds, so that today everybody's walking around is like a drone who's incapable of thinking, merely articulating whatever has been programmed in their minds. That is what is going on today. And we are seeing that the colonial people, 16th to 20th century, with Max Muller, Herbert Risley, William Jones, and others, they distorted through trying to identify who is the Sandrakutos that Megasthenes is talking about in Indica. And they said it's Chandragupta Maurya according to in the Purana chronology, but the chronologies do not match. Purana chronology of the Mauryas is close to 1500 BCE, whereas the Sandrakutos they're trying to talk about is 300 BCE. So there's almost 1,000-year distortion in what they introduced over there, and trying to say that Sanskrit is a daughter language of Proto-Indo-European, which originated in Central Asia with those kind of distortions. Then there's Aryan invasion or migration to India in 1500 BC. Then the notion that the Harappans are an isolated civilization, nothing to do with present-day Vedic system. And the Dravidians, by the way, could be the descendants of the Harappans. So this kind of a division policy, two language families. And Eurocentrism, using things like linguistics, anthropology, that Aryans, they conflated the notion of Arya, which in India has always been a noble person, into the English word called Aryan, and made Aryan into a race, which is utter nonsense, but they did that, and that has been promoted in people's thinking. They introduced the notion of caste system. Indians never had anything called caste. We only had jati, varna, kulam, gotra. This has been our way of looking at ourselves, but then they introduced something called caste system, and the impact of that is there till the present day, the distortion, and so on. So these are the kind of things they did. And present day, you might think, we live in good, enlightened times, so these things are all things of the past. But that is not true. We are seeing that our left-leaning socialist academia has used all this as received wisdom from the colonialists because it resonates well with their ideology. Their ideology is to show Hinduism as primitive, backward, stagnant. Hey, the colonialists already did that for us. Missionaries already did that for us. So they took all of that as received wisdom that should not be touched. Regardless of zero evidence, regardless of nonsense over there, they will not touch that. And they continue with these notions with outsider sociology. Ethic sociology is looking at Indian social dynamics with the outsider lens that are appropriate for the Western experience. The white European practice slavery. They practice oppression. They practice genocides with world wars and other such things. So there are several things that are applicable to them. Their theology had oppression of women, burning of women as witches, and so on. So feminism and all of this colonialism, postmodernism, all these things are applicable to their society. But we have Indian academia gleefully importing these lenses and force-fitting them into the Indian social dynamics. Whether it fits or not doesn't matter. I have a hammer and I'm going to hammer. Everything is a hammer, nothing else. So that's exactly what is going on over here. And we see they are co-opting results from archaeology, for example. Archaeology as a discipline does enormous good work in uncovering things in the past. But when you co-opt it, when it is co-opted by historians for their purpose, we have problems. And that is exactly what is going on. There are attempts, for example, to read ceramic changes, the pottery records, and so on, in favor of this so-called Aryan invasion. But there is absolutely nothing that would suggest that at 1500 BCE, there is a change in the pottery record. Pottery record also shows a continuum from a very long period of time. Then today, genetics, right? Genetics, where people like David Reich, who's trying to say Indians are two major people, the so-called North Indians, South Indians. He's discovered an ancestral North Indian, ancestral South Indian. All this nonsense, which are mathematical suppositions with questionable methodologies, questionable data, insufficient statistics to conflate it to the entire Indian population, but these claims are still being made, and these are internalized happily by people like Tony Joseph and a whole lot of others who take this nonsense and they build huge narratives around this very shaky edifice. That is what is going on. Questionable dependencies, assumptions, circular dependencies, and so on. And today it has become even worse, right? So this postmodernism has led to this whole notion of wokeism, where it is no longer objective reality. Objective reality is out of the window. It is what the mob thinks. It is the social values that the mob espouses. That is what is reality. And if you oppose that, you will be cancelled. That is the way today's dynamics work. And this is we call this wokeism today. They don't like this term, but that's what we call it as. They create an illusion of mass arrest, right? Unrest, with echo chambers in the media, very high decibel pitch over there, and they're coming out on the streets in an illusion of power, putting pressure on the government to make laws convenient to their lobbies. Today, this is happening in India, where the Supreme Court is trying to talk about same-sex marriages and so on, with justices like Chandrachud coming in and espousing these values learned at Harvard and places like that. We are seeing this happen. So today we know that the whole wokeism has been co-opted by the Islamo-leftist lobby. So the left, the deep left in academia, has joined hands very, very surprisingly with these Islamists who have got shady connections with Pakistan and other places. And India is in the crosshairs. And we have many, many people making these connections. Here's a sample of some of those connections where the Congress party willingly plays into this. And we are seeing enormous forces being applied in India. Closer we come to elections, the closer we are going to see this kind of nonsense. So even technology, if you go to AI today, there are several biases that have been internalized. Not a surprise, because we see that AI is learned from Wikipedia and places like that. So we see that. So one would like to know, what is this impact of historiography? I talked about these 5 frameworks and the kind of things they do. What is the impact on the narrative of the Hindus? We have to see, what is this Hindu identity? I'll talk a little more about that, but very, very briefly, initially, in very ancient times, it was, we are all in this together. Why do you need a name for yourself when you're the only one who existed, right? If you're the only one who existed, you don't need a name for yourself. If you're living with several others, then you need a name that, oh, you're a Muslim, you're a Christian, you're a Hindu. We don't need a name. So we were the only people. So we're all in this together. We are Brahman, Vedic ideas, living in rhythm with the universe. So this is the kind of ideas that we see in the most ancient periods of times. In India, we see that. Eventually, it evolved into the Astika, Nastika philosophies, where you have, for example, Nyaya, Samkhya, Vaisheshika, Yoga, Mimamsa, Vedanta, Astika. And Nastika evolved into Buddhism, Jainism, Charvakas, and others. So again, no conflict. These are philosophical debates people had on the nature of reality, on the nature of truth. How do you accept something as a valid knowledge? These are the kind of things. And today that has become something like when you look at India as a whole, Hindus, you see the dharmic civilization as one way of looking at it. Or Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs is another way of looking at it. Agamic, non-agamic, Vedanta, Advaita, Dvaita. So many divisions have come about. But then we see that a very strange thing has happened. Identity has been forced on us as an anti-reflection of the other. Like I said, from ancient times till Bin Qasim's time in 711, current era, we are one, Brahman, Astika, Nastika, no conflict. We live in peace. This is how we were. But then we became the other because we were everything the Muslims were not. So they came, the Arabs, the Turkic Muslims, with one book, one God, one way, and that is it. And when they looked at the Indians, they said, you're the kafir, you're the mushrik, and God hates you, and you are to be destroyed. And those kind of ideas came about. So we became the other, starting from there on. And this also happened in colonial times, from Portuguese 1498 all the way to present times. Once again, they came with one Bible, one way, one God, and everything else is a false ideology and so on. We again became the other. And here they gave us more names. From Kafir and Mushrik, we went on to become pagans. We became castes. We became idolaters. We became Aryans. We became Dravidians. We became polytheists. And so many labels have been introduced, all to differentiate who we are versus these people who came with inflexible, rigid ideologies and dogma. This is what we see over here. So today we have fractured identities in India, right, from 1947 to present. So we are seeing, if you take a look at the Indian context today, we see that the government claims that it is secular and it is equidistant from all religions, but that is in reality, we do not see that. In the practices, in the laws and the constitution, we don't see that. So this is a big hypocritical lie on the part of the Indian government. We see several vested interests controlling the discourse in India. Then we have seen the Marxists in academia. So all of these people have a view of who the Hindus are. Their view is Indian Hindus are divided as Dalits, Brahmin patriarchy, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, Brahmin privilege, Aryans, Brahmins, forward caste, Dravidians, backward caste. So this is the way they see us. So they create spurious identities, tensions, and destructions with their policies. And their policies are to create unequal laws and creating disincentives to being Hindus, creation of bigoted laws, and institutionalizing all of these distortions. So this is what we see happening and resulting in things like this. So what does that mean? Today, we are seeing the Hindu identity continues to be destroyed unabated. If you take a look, this graphic is from Harikiranji. And so we're seeing that three main lobbies, right? The religious groups, they claim persecution, they practice proselytization, or what is colloquially called love jihad and things of this nature, and they change the demographics of the country, and that way they get rid of Hindus. The government that works with policies of discriminatory laws, unequal laws applied on Hindus as opposed to the other. They work through appeasing these vote banks in places like Kerala, in places like Andhra, in places like Tamil Nadu, in places like this, or every Congress-ruled state. We're seeing appeasement of the minorities, West Bengal and so on, and they directly impact the rights of Hindus. All Indians should have equal rights, but that is not true in these kind of states. And we see academia, media, NGOs, they they take the adhikara for discussing what is Hinduism. The Hindu does not have agency over here. This agency has been taken over by these people. They distort the message and directly change the identity by their distortions. So these three forces conspire today to get rid of Hindus. And we're also seeing that all these forces, whether the religious groups, government, or academia, media, they are all puppets in the hands of puppet masters in the West, or the Western identity continues. So these narratives are coming about through oil money pressures from oil countries over here in the Middle East, or from evangelist pressures in churches in Europe as well as in the United States. One major pressure applier is this United States Commission of International Religious Freedom, a bizarre entity where the Hindus have no voice over here. So they invite a whole lot of Muslims or Christians and so on to give their so-called testimonies, but then the Hindu does not have representation over here to try and correct these messages or try to say what exactly is going on. So we see this bizarre activity happening. So bottom line, these forces are launching hostile attacks, and there's enormous deracination and distortions happening. So we are seeing that our ecosystem is attacked, whether it is our temples. Even in temples, you're seeing these proselytizers coming over there. Even in Tirupati, even in Shabarimala, you're seeing these people come over there and practice their ideologies, let's say, as a euphemism. And we are seeing universities that has been co-opted, schools, spaces, sacred spaces, everything has been attacked by these inimical forces. Our cultural practices are attacked, whether it is a marks we wear as Hindus. Hindu women are scared now to even put the sindoor or kumkum and go outside. And men clearly no longer wear the tufts in the back of their head or wear any traditional marks of their jati, varna. They don't do that. Our festivals are under attack, whether it is Diwali, where they say that, oh, you depleted all the oxygen in the air and there is animals are scared, people are scared, asthma people are suffering, all of these kind of things. When it is Holi, oh my goodness, there's no water anywhere. If you were to go and do Abhishekam in the temple, they'll say, oh my God, so many people are starving and you're pouring milk over these things. So things of this nature, even the foods we eat, they organize so-called beef festivals and they call Brahmin hegemony. So let me quickly continue so we don't waste much time over here. I presented to you some slides that show who distorted Indian history and why. So we saw 5 actors in this framework, right? We saw the colonial, the Eurocentric, the missionaries, the socialist academia, and the Marxists. These 5 frameworks have used the history of India to their benefit, imposing their ideologies, their very toxic ideologies, if you ask me. That has come in and they have been the ones who are controlling the way Indian history is written, the way Hindu identity is expressed, and so on. So we have many distortions, obviously. So in the second part, I don't have slides for this, but I'll just talk to you about it. So how do we address these distortions? One of the distortions often asked, especially if you're unfortunate enough to meet an evangelizer, so they'll say that, your ancestors have practiced divisions in society. Our way of life looks at all humans are equal and so on. So that's why it's good to leave Hinduism and become one of these other things. So right there's a problem because there's no such thing as division in India. What we see is grouping. We see grouping and organization. That is what we are seeing. And there are three ways of looking at this issue. One is historical, where you can examine the evidence. Then look at the experience of the practitioner, which is a bottom-up, and the traditional aspirational view, which is top-down. Three things that we can do. In the historical tradition, we can go into the sources of this organization of society. And the Marxists are so happy to always say the Purusha Suktam. If you look at the Purusha Suktam in Rig Veda, that is talking about the head being Brahmin and the legs, oh my God, the feet are Shudras and all of these things, therefore distortion. Utter nonsense. It is a metaphor for the whole of a society. So society functions by certain ways of doing things, and as a metaphor for society does not imply a division. You cannot divide your hands away, your legs away, and expect the body to function. The body is not going to function. It's not a division. It's an organization. The hands cannot do the job of a mouth. The mouth has got to eat and speak. The hands can't do that. Well, we can do some sign language, but that's about it. So things of this nature. So it is inefficient rather. So there are some problems. So our society is organized around these. It is not a division. It's a cohesive society organization where all parts are needed for functioning. Then the second historical tradition, if you take a look at Bhagavad Gita, for example, which is a historical record in India, I'm not even going to the dating of Bhagavad Gita, immaterial for us. But this is a document that has guided Hindus for thousands of years. So we take a look at that and what it has got to say. And it says that our gunas and our disposition are the ones that determine the varna of a person. So remember, this whole notion of caste, we'll come to that later, but then it is nothing to do with the Indian system. Indians are jati, varna, kulam, gotra. These are the ways that we see ourselves. And the gunas are, in Bhagavad Gita, it says gunas are the disposition that you are that determines your varna. Third historical source I'd like to take a look at is Adi Shankara. Adi Shankara now in a work called Vajra Suchi Upanishad. There are some people who say that, he did not author it. That is immaterial. That is trying to divert the discussion. This is a document that exists in the Indian historical context. Whether Adi Shankara authored it or somebody else, the question is, what is the contents of that? It addresses the issue of who is a Brahmana. So Adi Shankara is asking rhetorical questions and answering it himself. He's saying, because of all these people who are saying that Brahmins are at the top and Shudras at the bottom and such things, Adi Shankara is saying, is he chief as stated by the Smriti? And he analyzes it on the basis of many things. He's saying, is he special because of some particular Jivatma he's got? But then that is not true because everybody has a Jivatma. It goes from one body to the other. Then he says, is this something, a Brahmin is special because he's something to do with his Deha, his body? He says, no, all are similar. All have got similar body parts and we're all very, very similar. There's nothing to differentiate that. Then he's saying, is it something to do with the color of a Brahmin? He's saying, no, these colors are found in all the Varnas. For example, if you were to go to Malnad region of Karnataka, you're going to find some very, very fair-skinned Gaudas who are traditionally agriculturists and so on. And if you go to maybe Bihar or Tamil Nadu, you're going to find some very, very dark-skinned Brahmins. So you're seeing color is nothing to do with this. It is there among all people. Then he's asking, Adi Shankar is asking, is it something special of the Jati? But then that is also not true. He says that Valmiki and Vyasa, they rose to greatness. And nobody asked who the Jatis were, right? One was a fisherman, other one was a thief, literally. And then he's asking, is it because of the Jnana, some special knowledge that Brahmins have? He's saying, no, even the Kshatriyas have got great knowledge. And clearly we've seen Vishwamitra, who had great knowledge, was a Kshatriya king and so on. Then he's saying, is it some special karma with the Brahmins? He's saying, no, everybody is partaking of the karmic cycle. It cannot be that also. Then he's saying, is it because Brahmins are dharmic people, dharmic actions? Then he answers, no, everybody is practicing dharmic actions. So what exactly is a Brahmana? Then he's saying, only a realized Atman is a Brahmana. That person is devoid of jealousy, devoid of greed, of want, of negativisms, and has got benevolence towards all. Only that person is a Brahmana. So this is the Indian historical tradition defines it in this manner, and not in terms of oppressor, oppressed, power dynamics, and other such things. It is clearly an aspiration for the highest ideals that humanity can offer if we aspire for it. That is what it is showing. Then in the historical tradition, we can also look at the Buddhist records, right? The Buddhist records in Kapilavastu, there's a description in one of the Buddhist works that after Buddha had left his house, he had got enlightenment, and eventually comes back to his hometown. When he comes back to his hometown, his father is so happy, the king. So he issues a proclamation. Everybody will go to the forest where outskirts of the city and Kapilavastu and will meet the Buddha over there. And in doing so, he's describing all categories of society who must come. And we are seeing that in the description, they're all occupational, urban categorizations. We don't find any hint of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas. Rather, we're finding occupational kind of things. Then we look at the historical record in Megasthenes. When he wrote Indica, he came to Magadha, Patliputra, and he wrote about this. And he's talking about 7 kinds of people are in India, not even the so-called Chaturvarna and such things. It's like the Portuguese, right? The Portuguese are the ones who introduced this whole notion of casta. Their notion of casta, by now, almost everybody in India who's educated has learnt about this, that this whole notion of caste has come through casta. What is this casta? It's this bloodline purity. So this goes back to the bigoted practices of Christianity. So Christianity is deriving from the Old Testament and the stories in the Old Testament and so on, Hebrew works. There they believe that entire world has been repopulated to the sons of Noah. And who are the sons of Noah? They're Ham, Japheth, and Shem. In these 3 sons, we are told that I think Japheth is the father of the white races, and Shem is the father of the Semitic races, and Ham, all the colored people. Ham is now cursed by his father because he sees him in an intoxicated, naked state or whatever nonsense, but then he's cursed. And he's cursed to serve the other sons. His progeny should do that. So that is the basis for slavery in the entire Western civilization. In the Christian tradition, as well as Islamic tradition, it comes from here. It comes basically from here that God has commanded this person to serve the others. So that's the basis of that. And so they were interested in preserving this bloodline purity. How do you know God's intent if these races mix? If the bloodline of Ham, if the bloodline of Shem and of Japheth is not preserved, how do you know that? So the Portuguese saw in their holdings in the Americas, they saw mixed marriages between the natives, Africans, continental Europeans, their descendants, and they had no clue who was now a descendant of Ham, who was a descendant of this and so on. So to enforce certain kind of things for that bigotry, they introduced a notion of casta. That was imported into India and imposed on the Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra as casta and made into immobile caste system. And in addition to that, when people like Abbé Dubois, who was a missionary, he escaped the French Revolution. His head would have been cut off if he was there. He landed up in Pondicherry and in the French territories in Tamil Nadu, and he studied the Indian Hindu systems and so on. And it was very clear to him that it is a mobile system. It is very clear to him that the different varnas have got different practices of saucha and acharam. The acharam and saucha practices differ. So these people, the Europeans, in their discussions with each other, when they were manufacturing this caste system, they went about saying that if these achara, ritual practices are greatest in this category, we'll call them highest. So they became the Brahmins, hierarchically the highest, because of the acharam that they practiced. Brahmins did not say they were the highest. It is these people who said they were the highest. Then they saw that among the other categories, the achara was more and more flexible, eventually come to a class of people who were very few acharams. They were put at the lowest category. So it is their bigotry and their ideas that impose this hierarchy, that they are very happy in saying. So in the census records, we see that people like Herbert Risley and others, who were the census commissioner of British India, they enforced people to declare their caste. People had no idea. They knew their jati, they knew their varna, but they were forced to declare a caste, or they were put into that by the British, and they were forced to follow that year after year in their census. So that has now institutionalized over 150 years or so. This distortion has become pervasive in India. That is what we are seeing. So since 1947, unfortunately, the Indian government has reinforced this whole notion of a caste. What we can see in the historical record, remember, I'm talking about the historical record over here, Indian history showing social organization as helping the economy. If you go, for example, Angus Madison's works, you're seeing that India had the highest share of the world GDP 2,000 years ago and falling in a slope of 10% over 1,000 years. From 33%, it fell to around 25% when the British took over. And when the British came, it dropped to a very, very small value when they left in 1947. And now India is slowly inching its way back up. This is what we are seeing. My question is, how can India have been a successful country with so much of wealth if all it had was oppressor-oppressed dynamics? There's absolutely no evidence the so-called highest category Brahmins had any power. They were in fact beggars throughout society. They've been beggars with no money, no possessions and such things, living on dakshina, handouts and things of this nature of the king, of the society, of people like this. So how did they enforce, if they were oppressor, that all of these people must work for them, India should be enriched? So clearly we have a problem. The evidence is staring at us, but our heads don't accept these things. So clearly, we are seeing that India is cohesive, productive, and wealthy because of the social organizations that we had that encourage people to aspire for the most that they could provide to society. Then we also see the fluidity of the Jati Varna system. Nothing is rigid, immobile over here. Many, many examples are there. There is absolutely no rigidity, authority. There's no authority for enforcement. Whose authority says that, no, you should not do this. You should continue to be a Vaishya or somebody like that. Nobody is enforcing these things. And there's no power-wealth play also over here. If you look at Valmiki and Vyasa, these are the marquee figures, right, from ancient India, that they were mobile across the Varnas. Then if you come to more recent times, Aryabhatta, for example, he was a worker. There is a name such as Bhatta. Aryabhatta suggests that he was a worker and he got the highest wisdom of astronomical mathematical sciences, and it is his work that we're using even today. So clearly there are such things. And for example, I also give the example of Saurashtra Brahmins, who from Saurashtra, they were Vaishya people, traders, weavers. They came to Tamil Nadu and they adopted the acharams of Brahmins, and now they are Brahmins, Saurashtra Brahmins. Or the Peshwas, who were Brahmins, who adopted the achara of Kshatriyas, and they became Kshatriyas. So clearly we are seeing mobility everywhere. One more historical record, if you see Nune's account of Krishna Devaraya, Vijayanagar. So in Vijayanagar, every time during Vijayadashami, the king would open up the treasury and give alms to various people and so on. So this foreign traveler, Nunes, he's making an eyewitness account of that. He's saying on that day, so many people had assembled outside the palace walls, and the Brahmins were the most unruly lot. They're making so much of noise and disturbance there, and the palace soldiers were beating the Brahmins into staying in line. What does this tell us from the historical eyewitness record? Did the Brahmins have any power? They were beaten by ordinary soldiers into staying into place. So this is what we are saying. So what we have as caste is a gross distortion of Indian society's social organization. So the initial account that the missionaries put on us is, aren't all humans born equal? Well, empirically, we know that is not true. If you take 10 babies born in the same hospital, same day, One may be 8 pounds, one may be 9 pounds, one may be 7 pounds, one may have jaundice, one may have perhaps some congenital problems or other such things. So genetically, we are not equal, and the kind of things we have are not equal. So the Hinduism is all about acknowledging the reality that exists in phenomena in nature and trying to make sense out of that. So this is the reality, whereas this notion that everybody is born equal, that flies in the face of our conventional wisdom, what we see. There is no equality empirically. That is not to say Indians practice, Hindus practice inequality. That is not to say that, but to show a spurious notion is imposed on Hindus and painting them to a corner and trying to make them be on the defensive from there. So whatever I've said has to be seen in that context. Then there are people who say, oh, well, if you go to your books, for example, Manusmriti, that says, if you kill a Brahmin, you have far greater punishment. Isn't that discrimination by Varna? So you people practice a lot of discrimination. So once again, the use of the word discrimination is a shallow imposition of bigotry by very, very malicious people, contrary to historical facts. So as an example, I say that, let's take the example of President Biden, or let's just take Modi. When Modi is traveling around in India, what you see is the black cat security, the Z-class category security, with machine guns are there, all surrounding him, looking outside, making sure he's under no trouble anywhere, any point. I cannot go there and claim discrimination. I cannot say under Indian constitution, all are equal. Why is Modi getting Z category and I'm not getting Z category? You can't say. That's absurd, because for the prime minister is exceedingly important for the country. So he deserves a level of security that is unprecedented. You can't go there and say there's inequality. So that is what we see over here. So what we have seen in history, Indian history, is kings always invited Brahmanas to settle in their kingdoms. Why? Because Brahmins were like the special economic zones of today. If a Brahmin comes to an area, first thing the king does is gives them an agraharam, says, these villages you can use to develop this place. So the Brahmin sets up an agraharam, he sets up a temple and a patashala, and he starts teaching all the children. How do we know he's teaching all the children around? Because Dharampal has given us those statistics, British statistics, that says 50% or more are the so-called lower classes, and a few are the so-called middle classes, and very few people in the so-called upper classes. This is what Dharampal statistics are showing us. So the Brahmins would educate people in mathematics, they'd educate them in grammar, they'd educate them in several other fields. You might ask, why on earth were a farmer's son and a carpenter's son, why did they have to learn all these things? Well, it is because if you want to make a quality product, you must know measurement. If you can't measure, for example, if you're a weaver's son, and the weaver's son, let's say 2000 years ago, Indo-Roman trade, monsoons or winds are going to come into India in another 4 months' time. And you know that the ships will come there to trade in cotton textiles. And you know that typically they require about, let's say, 50 bales of cotton cloth. How do you know how much of cotton you must procure from the villages, how many weaving looms you require, how much you can do, what is the price you'll do? All this is mathematics. If you don't have elementary mathematics, how can you be profitable or productive on the world stage? Same thing goes for every other field that I talked about. If you do not have proper measurements, you can't do a good job. If you're a trader on the Indo-Roman trade, for example, the Silk Road or other such things, how do you know that the gold coin that the Chinese merchant is giving is maybe some tolas lesser than the gold coin of India? So the costs are some ratio. How do you know that without elementary mathematics? So mathematics and grammar and other things made the Indians productive. So when the Brahmins thought people of all the jatis and varnas, they could produce quality goods. That's why Angus Madison is saying Indian economy was 33% of world GDP. That is not a coincidence. It is because everybody is educated. We had an educated, literate workforce. So that means the Brahmins were in high demand. Every king was vying for the few Brahmins that were there. Whether it's northern India, southern India, eastern India, western India, they were all vying for the few Brahmins. So the few people that are important to your society, you say the punishment to kill them is greatest. This is what we are seeing. A reflection of today's ideas are there in the past because they assist in economic growth and the prosperity of the kingdom. So given the value that each member has a society, great deterrence is prescribed for crimes against valued people. Even today, if you kill a high-valued target, it is treated differently from other targets. If, for example, you go and kill a police officer versus some drug addict shot on the road, these are handled differently. We can see that even today. Although we like to think ideally that everybody is equal under the law, we are seeing that different things are practiced. So there's no discrimination by Varna. Rather, we are seeing values accorded by society. Then there are the people who come and say that, wait a minute, if you take a look at the untouchables, you people practice untouchables. See all the scavengers. They are all providing great service to society, but look what is going on. Well, here is where I try to present many more facts. I have slides, but I won't take the effort to show right now because it will take a long time. What I show is, look at the historical facts. India is a tropical country subject to many, many tropical diseases, dysentery, cholera, smallpox, malaria, with monsoons, water spread diseases, TB, pneumonia, all these things happen. The question is, when there are epidemics, we saw the epidemic with COVID recently, when such things are happening in India, villages were getting wiped out, how would our rishis have addressed these ill health? And we are seeing examples from growth of Ayurveda, from Atharva Veda onwards, Shuta, Charaka, Vagbhata. We are seeing great accumulation of medical knowledge. We are also seeing that there is a description of thousands of diseases, how to cure them, and so on. There is also evidence of clear understanding of hygiene. One example, the story of Karkati. Many of you may not know the story of Karkati. It appears in Yoga Vashishta. Yoga Vashishta is an account of young Rama, who has been instructed by Vashishta as well as Vishwamitra, through many stories, moral wisdom. One of them, the story of Karkati, is a monster. Karkati is a monster with a gigantic appetite. She wants to keep consuming humans and doesn't stop at all. But she doesn't consume everybody. She is discriminatory in who she consumes. She consumes people who do not follow the Dharma Shastras, who are gluttonous, who eat at improper times, who are not following the proper moral code and things of this nature. So she has a boon from Brahma. She does tapasya, gets a boon from Brahma. She says, I want to become like a suchi, like a needle head, so tiny, can only be seen by reflected light. And I want to enter humans through their nostrils and through their ears and affect their heart and consume them from the inside. And these are the kind of people she consumes. So even an elementary observer of the story will say, this is an understanding of these microscopic entities that cause disease and ill health. That is what is contained in the story. Europe only learned it after Leeuwenhoek was able to find the microscope in 1600s, 1700s. Then they knew about the germ theories and other such things came about 1700s, 1800s. Indians had this in the story of Karkati in Yoga Vashishta itself. So clearly, Indians have understood the importance of hygiene. And then if you take a look at British records, 1765, it says that there were traveling groups of Brahmins that go prior to the onset of annual diseases with monsoons, and they inoculate people in various towns and villages. How is it inoculation done? Through cowpox, variolation, vaccination, both were done by Indians, and there are enormous number of papers out there that describe how they were doing these things. So Indians understood this, and the people who were administering public health were the Brahmins. They were the Brahmins, not somebody else. Brahmins are going house to house and asking, have you practiced a prescribed diet for 30 days? If you practice that diet, then they'll give you the inoculation. So they clearly understood these things. So what do these evidences tell us? These evidences are telling us that there's a clear understanding of public health. There's a clear understanding of disease transmission mechanisms of diseases and other such things. There is an understanding that every profession carries its own biohazards. For example, if I'm a weaver, I'm exposed to cotton fibers and breathing cotton fibers every day. That is going to give me some respiratory problems, TB, pneumonia, and other such things may come. So I get some immunity to it. My colleagues get immunity. My wife and children get immunity, but not others who are not exposed to it. Similarly, if you're a butcher, every day in your workshop, you're chopping meat and you're exposed to rotting flesh and E. coli bacteria, right? So you get some immunity, your community gets immunity, but not others. If you're a farmer, you're working in soil, in corona complexes, you're exposed to so many of these viruses and bacteria, you get some immunity, others don't get that. So there's an understanding in ancient India that each profession has got a biohazard. So Vastu Shastra came about saying that when the Brahmin decides the Agraharam and other such things, they say in this place weavers will live. In this place, the goldsmith will live. In this place, the Kshatriyas, here the Vaishyas, and the southern end is a cremation ground and other such things. Then finally, the reason for these is not discriminatory. It is not upper-lower hierarchy, but an understanding that public health, keep these people in this place and you will not have problems over here. And throughout Indian literature, you find instances of how people behave when one jati comes in contact with another jati. Today, it's put as oppressor, oppressed kind of dynamics, but in those days, it was an understanding of public health. So it is these saucha practices and acharam practices that we see even in the Dharma Shastras. When a Brahmin comes in contact with, let us say, somebody, a weaver or some other person, prescription might be go and take one bath. And people say, oh my God, discriminatory. Why would he do that? But if you think about it, the Brahmin is the person with the least immunity among all of these artisan classes and others. He wakes up in the morning and he starts with his Gayatri Japam and his Vedic Sandhya Vandanam and whatnot. And all day long, he's got poor quality food and he's just sitting and doing no physical activity. So his immunity is the lowest. So the Saucha practices are the highest. Acharam and Saucha, the highest. So he's got to take one bath, two baths, he needs them. This is an understanding of public health. So this has been perverted entirely into a discriminatory system. Then what about the so-called scavengers and others? So people who service all the categories are exposed to the maximum number of pathogens. So they were asked to stay far from the other people. So this is the understanding. There is no discrimination. How can a civilization that has got Mahavakyas like Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, and other such things, seeing Brahman in every living creature, not just humans, including every aspect of creation, how can they be discriminatory? So there's paradox right over there. So I hope with that I've tried to show that this whole notion of upper, lower, everything is a socially constructed pyramid by the missionaries and the colonial people. Reality shows completely otherwise. So what I've done is I've addressed some of the distortions. That's just the second topic that I wanted to address. So the third topic I wanted to address is, what is a Hindu then? Who exactly is a Hindu? People say that we have Westerners who follow Hindus and we have Indians who are not Hindus. So who is a Hindu? Well, I've shown earlier, Hindus in India followed a Vedic rhythm of life. It is even outside of India. It was practiced, evolving into Astika, the theist, and Nastika, the atheist kind of philosophies. So everybody has a belief in dharma, karma, reincarnation. So that is one of the fundamental tenets over here. And we are seeing that the philosophical systems evolved in darshanas, right? Samkhya, Nyaya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Uttara, and Purva, Mimamsa, Vedanta, and others. And we also saw that the Hindu became the other after Islamic invasions, all the way through British invasions, Christian invasions, and so on. So we can try to see who a Hindu is by looking at the goal of life for a Hindu. If you look at the goal of life, to understand the goal of life of a Hindu, you must see what is the goal of life for Abrahamic people. For Abrahamic people, which we understand very well, thanks to constant evangelizing pressures and so on, we understand it. Their goal is to accept that there's a savior who died for your sin, something they call sin. And if you accept that savior, you'll be admitted to eternal life in heaven or eternal damnation in hell if you reject him. So this is the notion. So the goal of life is only to obey. You have to obey. You have to be a sheep. You follow the shepherd. So if you do that, then you're guaranteed this eternal happiness in heaven. This is the way they see it. In this kind of a notion, there is no place for wisdom. There is no place for any such things. You don't need knowledge, wisdom, nothing. Your only goal in life is follow. So you're a follower in that sense. Understanding this, it's the same even in Islam and Judaism. It's the same thing over here. If you questioning is the basis in which we build knowledge, by the way. If you question, that is blasphemy. God does not want blasphemy. Satan is sitting at every exit door. If you have a doubt, that is Satan tempting you. So you scurry back to the interior away from the door because that is where you're safe. Otherwise, you'll go to eternal damnation, right? So this is the idea. Or if you voice your question, that's blasphemy, will chop off your head. So those are the kind of notions that are over here. Hinduism is the antithesis of all of these things. Hinduism is based on questioning. Everything is questioning. whether it is the Upanishads, which are Sishyas asking questions to the Guru and getting answered over there, everything is questioning. You question the nature of reality. You understand the Brahmanas, the philosophical way of looking at life. You understand the Brahmanas, which are means through which you build knowledge, and you understand your true nature. Who am I? What am I? That is the goal of a Hindu. Am I the collection of my body parts? If I say my hand, obviously I'm something different from my hand. If I say my face, I semantically am different from my face. So what is this collection of objects? Who is that person who is being referred to over here? So that is the goal of Hinduism, where we understand that we have an Atman. Atman is a witnesser of everything that is happening over here. So we follow a karmic cycle based on our karma. We're following a karmic cycle based on our vasanas of previous lifetimes and so on. But our goal is to dispel avidya's ignorance about our existence, and gain vidya through as many means as possible. So that is what leads a Hindu is. So Hindu is a seeker of truth, and we seek truth through darshanas, pramanas, and our goal is to live life dharmically. So we have, for example, the purusharthas. These are the ways that we see our life through artha, for example, security, wealth, through kama, through the fulfillment of desires and acquisition of objects and things like that, through dharma, through noble life, duties and charity, practicing dhanam and other such things. Finally, moksha, seeking bliss through knowledge. These are our goals that we see in life. And we have got the darshanas to guide us. We have got the dharma shastras to guide us. We got pramanas to guide us, and so on. And there are many ways that we can practice what Hinduism is, right? Today, one is a philosophical way of doing things. Other one, we need to live life in the purusharthas that I talked about. So to practice Hinduism, we typically have samskaras, right? We have samskaras for birth. We have samskaras for youth, samskaras for marriage, even for death. Today, we have forgotten all these samskaras. Most of us only practice the birth samskaras and namakarma, where we name the child, and maybe vidyarambam, we do that. At wedding time, once again, we have got Vedic rituals, and at death, most people again practice that. But in between, there are many which we don't. But even this is a tenuous link to our practice of identity as Hindus. Then the observances of fast. Hindus typically have a fast, for example, Ekadashi, which is the 11th day in the Tithi. You might practice that. Every month you practice fasting. Fasting is a religious discipline. It's a way of saying that I will give up this particular desire for this particular thing, and I will practice discipline in that way. Observances of pilgrimages, for example, a Chardham or Shabarimala, or going to somewhere else. So these are some of the things that Hindus practice. Observances of festivals. Festivals bring so much of joy, beauty, richness to our lives. This is a way where we express reality or connection to the cosmos, whether it is Deepavali we celebrate, or Ganesha Chaturthi, or any observance, we do that. Then through the yamas and niyamas, which are good works and good deeds. This is what we do. You cannot run a marathon as soon as you get up. When you get up in the morning, you must first eat, then you warm up a bit. Once you warm up sufficiently, you've trained, then you can run a marathon. Similarly, you cannot aspire for a sattvika way of thinking and life unless you practice it every day. And Hindus have to practice this yamas and niyama, which is good works. What are the good works I can do? What are the good deeds I can do? How do I conduct my life? These are the things. Attending pravachans of gurus, satsangs, learning, reading books, watching videos of thought leaders today on YouTube and things of this nature. Then doing yoga, some kind of, even if you're just doing asanas initially and pranayama and other things, you eventually ramp yourself up. Doing nitya karmas. For example, nitya karmas, Parashara saying that we had 6 activities daily, things like snanam, a bath, sandhya vandanam, morning and evening, recitation of the Vedas, then veneration of ancestors, doing homam, doing tarpanam, which is worship. We may not be able to do all those things today. Most people don't even do sandhya vandanam and other things. But these are the practices that define who we are as Hindus. Then going on to puja. These are mentioned in the Griha Sutras, for example. You do pujas and other things, do stotram at home and such things. Worshipping at temples. You go to temples and you worship them, pilgrimage and such things. Do dhanam, charity, and dakshina to gurus. So these are the practices that define who we are as Hindus. Our identity as Hindus, this is what we are. In addition to externally wearing marks that we are Hindus, these are the practices. Once we have the connections to these things, then associated with this is the cultural richness, whether it is music, whether it is so much of bhakti literature, bhakti music, poems, dances, expressions, foods, dresses. All these things are cultural adornments and enrichments that help us to express our identity through all of these things. So clearly we have defined what exactly is the Hindu identity. Anybody who has got these things, you need not have 100%. There's no such thing, right? It is what suits you. How are you able to embed these things, knowing that it is a journey? You incorporate more and more into your life, saying this is a rhythm of life my ancestors lived. It makes great meaning. In the contemporary world, these are the things I will do. And I'll again find meaning in these paths towards this aspirational goal of dispelling avidya. That is what we're doing over here. So my final topic before I stop over here is the assertion of the Hindu identity itself. That's what our talk is all about. Assertion is such a strong word. Immediately people come to mind militant kind of thing. What is going on over here? Is he falling into a trap of people trying to say Hindus are militant people? And no, utter nonsense. So there are several steps to asserting the identity. The first is internal. The first step we take is a personal journey and as a family unit, a journey to understand Hindu practices. I talked about so many Hindu practices, right? So how much of that can we incorporate into our daily lives? That is the first thing. The second step, again internal, is to understand about Sanatana Dharma philosophy. We have been so deracinated, removed from our context. Ignorance is pervasive in all our communities. The ignorance, the void has been filled with distortions. Distortions has filled our heads, so we need to detox ourselves, get rid of all those distortions, decolonize our minds, and try to understand actual Sanatana Dharma philosophy by reading the works of masters. And there are several such people out there who have made many, many modern day commentaries, whether it is Vivekananda, whether it is Sri Aurobindo, and many others are there. And we can read their contemporary works. If we don't know Sanskrit, no problem. Maybe you understand in your own native language, whether it is Malayalam or whether it is Tamil or whether it is Hindi or whatever, you can do that. Or even in English, many of these people are written in English. You can read that. And you have to learn about the history. Much of the history, for example, that I discussed, that explains a lot of about our past and why we have been distorted like this. And the third step, again internal, is to understand Abrahamic beliefs. Abrahamic people are the top number one people who are attacking Hinduism today, and as well as others associated with similar thought systems. So we need to understand their practices. We need to understand their history. So once we learn about them, then we understand what kind of philosophies, if any, they come with, and how you can rebut that using the kind of knowledge you have garnered over here and say, what is your goal in life and what is their goal in life? They are believers. Belief implies dogma. Belief implies there is no validation, no proof, nothing. Whereas Hindus are seekers of the truth. Truth matters over here. That you're a scientist. All Hindus are scientists eventually. So you're going to do that. Then as a community, these are all internal things we can do to assert the Hindu identity. As a community, we can do things. As a community, for example, history has shown us that when India was under the yoke of British imperialism, Tilak came on the scene. Tilak came on the scene and said, you know what? We need to get the Hindus out on the road. We need to get them on the road and understand they are a community. And so he popularized in Maharashtra the practice of Ganesha festival, taking Ganesha out in a huge procession with a lot of pageantry around that. So he did that. And that indeed had the effect of bringing people on the roads, identifying themselves as who they are, expressing who they are. That courage, esteem came about. So we have seen that coming out as a community helps. Other communities have shown, whether it's a mosque or the church, how when they are together, they are able to project their power. So Tilak showed that. We have seen that in India itself, recent history, when the Ramayana and Mahabharata were aired on TV in the 80s and 90s, we saw people really waking up to this. It is a phenomenon in India of those times when people really woke up to some of these things. Pretty soon followed by Advani's famous Rath Yatra, which went throughout the country, and Ayodhya. We saw there was mobilization of people, but it ended in what we saw, and enormous distortions levied against Hindus after that. We are seeing the political fallout of that even today. Even today, there's a conflation. If you want to attack Hinduism, you attack Modi. And through attacking Modi, you go and say that the BJP and Hindu nationalists, Hindutva, all those are tied. One is tied to the other, one is tied to the other. So your primary goal of bigotry against Hinduism is deflected as if it is only against Modi, only against the so-called entity called Hindutva. But the reality is this: the bigotry is there against Hinduism. And one needs to understand this political fallout. So Hindus as a community need political activism, electing Hindu leaders to political office, whether it is in India or United States or Europe, elsewhere. We need to try and do these kind of things. We need to have administrative activism. How can we encourage our youth to take up IAS, IFS, IPS, all of these kind of civil services and try to aspire for these offices, so that we know that when people are in administrative power, they have the insight and understanding of the civilization, and they're not internalized the nonsense, and they'll impose it on us tomorrow. So we have to make sure that there's administrative activism. There needs to be legal activism. We need to build legal teams with sufficient funding who can pursue the people who attack Hindu identity legally, whether it's on media or elsewhere. Even in constitutional laws, we need legal teams to go after them and challenge them in courts and so on. So that does not happen, but we need it. Organization activism. We need to have sufficient groups that can collect money and be sufficiently funded to do all of these things I'm talking about. So with that, I think I've talked about the assertion of the Hindu identity at the internal, in the individual level, at the community level, and the contemporary identity. Many people mockingly say, okay, if you have this Ghar Wapasi, who is this person going to be? Is he going to be a Brahmin? Is he going to be a Shudra? It is falling into a paradigm that they want. If there is mobility, what is preventing all of us Shudras? All of us are Shudras today working in corporate America, corporate India, corporate Singapore, elsewhere. We are all working as Shudras. What is there preventing us from aspiring towards this Brahmana qualities, which is what Adi Shankara is saying, enlightened soul, who's devoid of jealousy, who's got benevolence towards all, knowledge, everything. So what is preventing us from doing that? It's an aspirational goal. So all of us can aspire towards this and adopt the appropriate practices. So the practices, the Saucha and the Acharam practices, do we continue that? Yes, it is a remembrance of our heritage, of our ancestors. We have to contemporize that because we live in a world where many of these things cannot be practiced or maybe have become irrelevant. We need to see that. We have to understand that we are knowledge seekers. We are protectors of dharma. One of the things in living dharmically is to recognize adharma. When you recognize adharma, you must stand up against it. You must stand up against it and see to it that the adharma is vanquished. That's what we need to do. Speak up against it and destroy it wherever it arises. So the future, what about the future? I think our goal is to try to show that Sanatan Dharma is a syncretic way of life. Syncretism means it sees divinity everywhere. It tries to see that this notion of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, everybody is part of a family. Dharmics can understand this. People who do not belong to the dharmic civilizations cannot understand this. It is dangerous to offer it to them. But fellow dharmics can understand. So we need to understand and expound on what this whole thing means. We need to repeatedly show that Abrahamics are incapable of live and let live. Live and let live. That is our mantra for a cohesive, harmonious society and life. And Abrahamics today are incapable of doing that. So in order to live, they have to destroy the other. Once they destroy the other, then the true religion can flourish. Only the true things flourish. So there is enormous bigotry there. How do we show the hypocrisy in this way of living, that this is neither harmonious, peaceful, or loving, or any such thing? How do we show that? So we need to repeatedly show that only Hindus are capable of live and let live. Abrahamic philosophies are incapable of doing that. So we have to do that. And we also have to show that Sanatan Dharma practices are the best hope we have in today's world with climate change, with so many other things. Today, the world is seeing enormous destruction happening in species. Species are getting destroyed in the current Holocene extinction event. We are seeing that our atmosphere is polluted, our waters are polluted, pollution is through the air everywhere. Health is on the decline. Almost every one of the newer generations has got some health problem or the other. Mental agony, suicides are happening, marriages are breaking down. Enormous stress is there because of our rat race in the corporate cycle, because of unbridled capitalism. Capitalism believes if you're not growing, you're dying. So you continuously rape the earth, getting its resources to sell more, and so on and so forth. This is what we're seeing. It's an outgrowth of the Abrahamic thought that God put man in charge of creation to do as he likes with it. In contrast with the other idea, dharmic idea, that if we can reduce our karmic footprint, we can reduce our carbon footprint. This is the dharmic idea, and we have to live dharmically so that all life is sustained. We have a responsibility towards the entire cosmos, not just humanity, not just the animals, towards everything. We have a responsibility. Only Sanatan Dharma has got the philosophical framework to address these great problems. As Hindus, we need to assert our identity by repeatedly talking these things. With this, I'll stop. Ravi Shankarji, to turn it back to you.